having the right tools to manage projects, scope creep, knowing how to organize project work. The more complicated the project, the worse it is, of course. Another pain point was assigning and keeping up with the task state and completion, where people are, where everybody is. You know, if you're running a lab, you know, how are the undergraduates doing? How are the graduate students? What's the state of the overall project? Task prioritization, communicating, so organizing and then communicating what the priority of the tasks are. Difficulty in estimating how long it might take to do different parts of the project, different tasks. Having a centralized and cohesive communication was also another real challenge for people. And the iterative nature of data science workflow really threw people for a loop as well. And we talked about how the traditional tools for managing computer engineering or software projects don't fit for data science. And so we produced an alternative data science agile approach that we're going to talk about again today. Another issue was the high overhead for project management tools. Let me go and just get a quick thumbs up. So if you can use your reactions for this. If you have ever used something like Microsoft Planner or one of these professional project planning tools, go ahead and give a thumbs up. I'm just curious. Okay. And for those of you who have done that, a handful of folks, how many of you loved your professional strength data, project planning tools? Oh, and they're disappearing. So maybe one person liked, okay, Dale, no, I don't, okay, Dale, you like, good for you. And that's generally the experience. They're really good if you need them, but you have to go all in to use these tools. So people took issue or had trouble with it being high overhead for these project management tools, especially if you don't have a dedicated project manager. And finally, communication between stakeholders. So between the business team or the researchers and the technical folks, the folks that are doing stuff and the folks that are responsible for it, communication between them is difficult. So those are the pain points. So what we're going to do today is we're going to review the data science-centric approach. Then we're going to talk about how to actually do this using one single framework for all the different tasks that we want to do. And then we're going to go back to the scorecard. We're going to see how well we did, whether it addresses the issues that we identified last week. Right, so what's so different about the data science workflow? And this is true not just for data science, but for research in general. And also it's very similar for research and for analytics projects. And what's different is that in a regular project, time goes in one direction. So in a software engineering project, it's not like, oh, we want to start over. You don't, that's called rebasing in project management. And you do not do that unless you absolutely have to. So generally things proceed from beginning to end, you lay things out and are able to do it. Even in agile workflows where you might have some iteration, you don't never go back. Data science and research, it's entirely different. You may start with the problem definition, and then you get to the data exploration and you find you don't have the data you need to answer the question. So what happens? You go back and you redefine the problem. That happens all the time in data science. You may actually even get all the way to the point where you're doing problem definition, data exploration, and then you begin this work. And this is for traditional machine learning, where you're doing modeling, where you're doing building predictive models, and you have to build engineering, you have to engineer features, and then you do an assessment. You may find after a couple of turns of this crank that there's not enough signal in your data. So even from here, you have to go back. And in order to know if you need to go back or if you don't need to go back, or whether you need to continue in this cycle or you need to stop this cycle, you need to have tight communication about subtle topics. So sometimes you need to be able to communicate really well to everybody on the team that a particular feature worked really well or a particular feature did not work very well at all. And you have to be able to communicate that easily and quickly to members of the team. And then finally, deployment. So data science is different. Long story short, data science is different, requires different tools, requires a different approach. So what are the 5 activities of this agile data science? Well, I call it DS Agile. Well, one is sprint planning. You have to plan what's going to be happening during a block of work. That's common with regular Agile. The second activity is continuous communication. Data scientists and analysts and the researchers and the stakeholders and the subject matter experts all need to be able to communicate on a continuous basis seamlessly. Third activity, paired group coding and problem solving. You always need to be sharing and working with code together. Demos, you want to know where people are. You want to get a good sense of actually what things are looking like. And then finally, model analysis and review. So that's what you go through every sprint. So this might be every week, it might be every 2 weeks, but really this is a cyclical process. And so you're always going from one to the others. You're always cycling through. So one addition or one change of this is doing sprint planning at the beginning of the week and then doing model analysis and review at the end of the week. You know, throwing no shade at the principal investigators and the faculty that we have here, but y'all are hard to get in meetings sometimes. You're busy. So rather than trying to get you twice in 1 week, what we actually suggest is that instead what you do is you move the sprint planning down here. So at the end of the week, you do your model analysis and review, and then immediately after you do your planning for the next book of work. It's a little bit different from normally how you do Agile, but that tends to work good for data science, especially in academic settings. So let's blow this out a little bit. Well, actually, let me go ahead and let me ask the question, how are we going to do all this? Well, the answer is we're going to do all of this in GitHub. So let's go ahead and take a look at a quick look at GitHub, what it looks like, and how these different things fit together. And actually here, let me go ahead and let's talk about the GitHub ecosystem. So in the GitHub ecosystem, you have repositories, and repositories are where you're versioning your code and sometimes small data. What else do you have? You also have Readmes. So this is information that you have on your front page of your GitHub repository. What else do you have in GitHub? You make commits. So you actually finish up a little bit of work and then you make a commit. And if some of these terms are unfamiliar to you, don't worry. Next week, we're going to be going into more in-depth. We're going to do a high-level look at all of these in just a moment. You're able to write issues, milestones, and you have what's called a project view. So what are these things? Well, here is an active repository. We have an active data science engagement right now. The lead on this project is Dr. Bell, and I'd like to apologize in advance to Dr. Bell if I mess up any issues or anything, which is entirely possible. I promise to go back and fix it. So what you're looking at right here is this is generally the repository right here. This is all of the files that you have when they were last edited. And what you see here are the messages, the last messages having to do with the last time that these were updated. So these are the commits. This is the README file. Every GitHub repository should have a README file. So what's a README file good for? Well, we'll see in a moment, but it's a good place to put information about your project. Let's go and take a look at issues. Issues are an excellent way for you to make notes about what needs to be done. So here, let's go and take a look at this one. Refine LDA viz. So this was put in there by Dr. Bell, and it's about some work that needs to be done. So the words don't currently show up on the side of the LDA viz, and it's been assigned to somebody who's working on this project. So that communication, issues are meant to note things, and it's not just issues and problems. This might also be future ideas for research. This also might be additional background research that you want to do, or it may be additional code you want to write, or it could be problems that you do want to have solved. Okay, so far we've seen the repository. We've seen what the commits are. We've seen what the README is. We've seen what issues look like. All of these are great, and these address some of the problems that we were talking about before, but I don't see here how you can actually manage a project with this yet. You know, the issues are in order, are only in order by numeric, so you don't know what's most important. You don't know who is really working on something. And you can look here and you can see what's been closed and what's open. So here's all the issues have been closed. But this is not really the view that we need to manage a project. And it wasn't until just a few years ago that this was it, that this was all that you had in GitHub. But then they added the one missing part that allowed all of this to be pulled together, and that is the project's overview. And it's stunningly simple. All that happens here, I'll zoom out a little bit so we can get a view. Quick question on chat, and I think we've opened up chat for people. So I have a question for chat. Does anybody know what this board is called? Yeah, Scott, you're exactly right. This is called a Kanban board. And it's often used in Agile. And the whole idea is you have work that needs to be done, that's your backlog. You have work that you're going to be doing right now, which is your current sprint. So this is what you're planning on doing during this week or during however long your sprint is. And then you have in progress, which is, okay, we're actually working on this now. And then you have the review. So I think I'm done, but it needs to be reviewed. And finally, you have done. So now we actually have an overview of the entire project all at once. And another important thing to note, so we can see the project, we can see the current state of the project, but what about prioritizing? Well, it turns out prioritizing is actually pretty simple. You can drag and drop cards to different locations. So in the backlog in particular, this is work that you know needs to be done, but it's not happening right now. So the act of prioritizing is literally the act of sorting those cards in the proper order. And some of you may have noticed already that all these cards are issues. So the issues that we saw previously listed here in numerical order are now simply being listed here in a Kanban board and also listed in the order that you want to put them. So what normally happens with a Kanban board or during sprint planning is at some point before that meeting, you put these in order. That's called your backlog grooming. So these are the order that you want to have done. So in a regular sprint planning, you would click on this, you would assign it to somebody, and then you would drag it over to the current sprint. So how do you see who's working on what? Well, you'll notice these little icons right here. Little icons represent people who are working currently on a particular card. And if you click one of these, then you can filter and see all the cards, in this case, that Dr. Bell has. So that is an easy way to filter out and to see who is working on what. You can also see the progress of particular cards and you can follow them across. So let's go back out again. Now you've been introduced to all of the elements. Now, let's go back and let's talk a little bit more about how all these sort of work together. So in a sprint, remember the elements of the sprint that we talked about before? We have communication, paired group coding, demos, and then model analysis, followed by sprint planning because we moved that down. So how do you have continuous communication? Through issues. So through issues, you not only create the issue the first time, but within the issues, and Dr. Bell, do you know of one where there's really good conversation going on in the issues with IB archive off the top of your head?
I think most of our conversation tends to be in the pull requests.
Oh, be in the pull requests, which I don't talk about until next week. Okay. No, that's fine. So in here, you'll notice with this description, I can ask a question leave a comment. I can even take a picture and drop a picture in here. So if I want to whiteboard something, I can whiteboard it, take a picture of it, and drag and drop it here. So this is how you can communicate asynchronously, but continuously throughout a project. So continuous communication through issue comments. The paired group coding, that's driven by the cards and what is in the current sprint. And you know who needs to be there based on who's actually on each of the individual issues. Demos, where you demonstrate your work, that's not necessarily, well, actually, demos is covered here, isn't it? So who's going to be presenting? Who should be presenting and what should they be presenting? Well, it's everything that's over here in the done. So that's how you know who's going to be presenting during demos. It's stuff that got done during this sprint. And finally, model analysis review and then sprint planning. All of that is driven by the Kanban board. So Dr. Bell, could you describe just a little bit what the end of sprint meetings and that review and assessment and sprint planning kind of looks like? What screen do you use when you do that work?
So whenever we are reviewing the work that we've done for the week and trying to determine what we should do in the future, this is the main screen that we use, the actual Kanban board. So we talk about the things that we've done according to the issues, if people need to close the issues. And with some conversation, we put conversation in issues and then close them. But this is really our main board that we use during our update meetings and to describe what our next steps will be.
Thank you. So the Kanban board is where this model analysis review and the sprint planning takes place. So often that the current state of the work, so if you're doing predictive modeling and you want to talk about what the current version is and how well it's working, sometimes that information is directly included there in the issue, especially if it's that one particular issue improvement that resulted in that improvement, it usually is right there. So this is the Kanban board is where all that work can take place. So this is the ecosystem that we're working with. So we have the repositories. You saw what a repository looks like. You saw the README. You saw the commits and the issues and the milestones. These are all different things. So what brings them all together? It's that project view. So the project view is what ties everything together. And I tend to think of this like, so this is called a tensile, this is a 3D model for tensile integrity. And the interesting thing about this image right here is literally being held up. I'm sorry, this table is literally being held up by strings, and it's all through tension. So there's one string which is actually holding up the table, and it is actually right. So it's this string attached to this and to here. So that one little string is actually holding everything up, and it's able to do that because there is tension that's formed by these other strings. So these other strings have downward tension, are holding down, and that tension on the string right there is force up. So it's all being held together because of the tension between all of the parts. That's actually what's happening here with GitHub project. So let's think about how this works together. I'm going to run through adding an issue. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is to take a few moments and to actually create your own repository. If you don't have one already, to start a new one if you already have one, and to start building this out. There's going to be one part that you may or may not be able to do depending on what sort of level of GitHub organization you have. But we'll give you some pointers on how to get the full power of GitHub if you're not able to get to the project's view. So before we start running through, what questions do you have? Imong, if you could go ahead and allow people to unmute themselves. What questions do you have so far?
Hi, this is Ed Levine again. Thank you for this great workshop. So I don't have a GitHub account, so I'm really starting literally at scratch. I did look in between this class and the one last week, I saw the .com, so I wasn't quite sure. Are we supposed to be working directly with GitHub? Are we supposed to work through Vanderbilt?
Great.
Are there security issues we have to worry about by having our data up there?
Mm-hmm. Oh boy, like 4 great questions, all in a row. So a couple of things. One, yes, you're right. It's github.com, and you are able to create private repositories that other people don't have access to, but that does not absolve you of the responsibility to protect your data. Often, data is stored elsewhere. So the kind of data that we might put in a GitHub repository would be small data that tends to be like reference data. If you're always like a lookup table, if it's always there and if it's not, protected, then that makes sense to have there. But very, very large data doesn't work well with Git in any event. So that really needs to be in a separate storage place. And that's actually the subject of another workshop that we will do. It's not on the schedule for this semester, but different options that you have. GitHub does offer something called large file storage, but you have to pay for it. At the free level, directly from github.com, you can get unlimited private repositories. You get a lot of things. You don't get the project's view. However, if you're an academic, then you can actually register to get to create an educational organization. And we'll probably do a special one-off workshop for anybody who's interested. We'll send out an email, see who's interested on how the steps to go through to get that. That's what we have. We don't pay for ours. It is hosted on the web. So this is not a local on-prem, but it's hosted by GitHub, but it is our own GitHub organization that has academic credentials. So we get everything. With the academic credentials, you get everything that they offer, except for the pay add-ons, such as testing and things like that, that usually are more for businesses. Those you have to pay for. But we tend not to use a whole lot of those. Did I answer all of your questions?
Yeah, I just want to just verify what you said as I was writing it. So for the project view, which you emphasized is a pretty key step for this,
yeah,
that we have to set up some sort of special arrangement. Okay.
And for that, I don't have my card in here anymore. I use the electronic card, but so you take a picture of your Vanderbilt ID, you send it to them. They do it in a day or two, so it's not too bad. And if they just had that project view available to you, then I wouldn't even necessarily bother. But it gets you that. It also gets you GitHub Classroom if you want to start using this in classes as well. So it's worthwhile. Great question. Other questions?
Hey, Jesse, it's Leah.
Hi there, Leah.
Hi. I was wondering if you could comment on Bitbucket, which was one that we started using instead of GitHub because there were issues with seemed like GitHub, you could only have either a fully private or a fully public account, unless it sounds like what you're suggesting is having this organization account.
Yeah.
But in Bitbucket, do you know, are these similar kind of project management tools available?
Good question. The last I looked, which was last year, they did not have the project management tools, and so we've stayed with GitHub. And you're right there; it's easier to sort of mix permissions. But once you have the organization, then you do have a lot more control. Because once you have the organization, you can invite people in. They could be outside collaborators, or you could have people inside, and you can make teams, and you can have this. This team has access to these, full, like admin, for these repositories, but they only have read for these, and they can't see these at all. Okay. So a lot more fine-grained control once you have the organization.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, up to this point of the projects, there's a lot of parity between the two. But yeah, the kicker for us is the projects, as you'll see in a moment. That's where we get our attention stability. Other questions? For Vanderbilt also, Vanderbilt also hosts something as well. So long as, and what you want is you want to have the GitHub so you can have the project view. Other questions? And Umang or Dr. Bell, did I miss anything on chat?
Someone is asking, let's see, what is the normal sprint length? Or what is a traditional sprint length?
So what is your answer?
So in our projects, we tend to have a sprint length of 1 week. And occasionally we'll have sprint lengths of 2 weeks. And the reason and how we decide upon these numbers is the availability of whoever's on the team, to the team members, as well as the tasks that are assigned. So we usually find that 1 week is a great time period to be able to check in with people on how the project tests are going, and also follow up and remedy any situations. So.
And you do get to set what that sprint length is going to be. So if you, for example, have like deep learning projects, for example, there is sort of a hard limit to how much you can get done in a week, because training models sometimes takes time. So in that case, for some deep learning projects, it might make sense to have a 2-week sprint. So if those tasks are large and they take multiple days, so long as you have good communication, then you can go 2 weeks, that's fine. If you have a very tight deadline, then you probably want to have shorter sprint cycles so you can iterate more. So those are all the things to sort of keep in mind. Are you uncertain about about the direction you're going to be going? So if you have a project that might turn on the head of a dime, you might want to have 1-week sprints, right? So you can actually respond quickly to lack of signal or the issues that you may find. Great. Other questions?
I think another interesting question here is from someone who says, we work with PHI. Are there HIPAA compliant ways to use this type of workflow?
So the trick here is to separate out your identifiable data and your analysis and your work. So what we will do when we deal with healthcare data, for example, is healthcare data would very likely be stored in Red Hat. No, Red Cap. Did they really have to go with red for both? So Red Cap. And so what we do in the code is we say, okay, enter your credentials, and then when you begin your analysis, it will go to Red Cap, grab what it needs, and download that in real time. So that is never versioned, that is never put into the repo at all. So that data never appears in the repo, so it's separate, so you don't have to worry about it being exposed in some way. So what data would you include in there? Let's say that you have all of your locations in your hospital mapped. So 21 is ER. Well, great. That table that has all the lookup values, absolutely. Go ahead and version that, put that into the repo. That's information everyone's going to need. It doesn't have any PHI. It's not big. So what data do you keep out of your repo? And we'll talk about this next week, but you might even want to put in an entry into git ignore, so you can't version it. Data which is very large, data which is binary, meaning that it's not text stored, but is compressed. That doesn't play too well. Data which is sensitive or protected, you don't want that in there either. Anything that you wouldn't want to get out. Even if you make your repository private, the fact is it's still being stored in the cloud. And cloud is just shorthand for someone else's computer. Other questions? All right, we're good? Excellent. Then I would invite you now, if you have created a repository, to go ahead and make a new one. I'm going to go through the steps of making a new repository myself, as a matter of fact. And let me clear this, Control-Shift-Alt-H. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a new repository right now, and you can follow along with me. So I'm just going to go to github.com. And yours may look a little bit different, but I'm going to just click on new. One of the interesting things about GitHub is they tend to make your most likely next step to be a big green button. And that's the case here. So the big green button is new. And You probably won't have the issue, you won't have the template possibility there. This is my own private. This is not even in my GitHub org for data science. And I'm just going to call this one, projects in GitHub. It is a good idea to put as much of a description as you can. So I'm just going to put, sample repository for illustration. I'm going to go and make mine public, but you can make yours private. And it's important to always select a README. So the README you always want to have there and available. You can add a license later, but you probably want to add a license because two things will happen if you don't have a license. One, people will use your stuff in a way that you don't want. Or two, people won't use your stuff at all because they don't know what they're allowed to do or not to do because there's no license. So I'm going to immediately break my own advice and not use the license right now because I know I'm going to be deleting this in a moment. So I create repository, and now I have a blank repository that has no issues yet. And I do have the projects here because I have the elevated privileges. But let's go ahead and see what we might do here. Notice right here that we have a little pencil icon. This means that you can actually edit this README file right here on the web. This is actually a great thing to do. What I suggest to people when they're first starting a project, graduate students who are here, you sit down with your faculty member and they say, I have an idea. Say, all right, great, hold on, just wait one moment. Open up GitHub, create a repo, and click on this right here and take your notes right here in the README. The README is the place where you want to have the onboarding for other people who might want to work on your project or to remind you of what you were doing when you come back to this project. How many people have the luxury of only working on a single project right now? You're only thinking about or working on one project. Raise your hands if you're working on one project. Wow. Now, Marcus, no, you have a couple that are in your mind. I know, because I'm working with you on them. They're related.
Well, on my mind, yes.
So a few folks, you folks are very lucky. The rest of us are dealing with multiple projects and having a page, a README page to reorient ourselves when we come back, or years later when we come back and want to extend. This is a brilliant way to very quickly get back involved. This is also a great way to onboard new people into your project, collaborators, graduate students, undergraduates. Every semester we have undergraduates that want to come and work with us. It's really nice to be able to point them and say, okay, you want to start on the project? Great. The first thing you do is go and read the README. It has all the notes, has all the information. And we'll talk in a moment about what a great README has in it. But begin to take your notes here, notes here. You'll notice there's a pound sign at the very top one. That's actually your heading. So second letter heading is like, second level. So this is sort of the first little tension string, which is people want to come here, people are driven to come here because of the README. So do you know off the top of your head what the Zoom link is for your next meeting? Oh, geez. It might be in your calendar, it might be in an email, but if your next meeting is about this project, the Zoom link is going to be right here in the README because you put it there. The contact numbers, the contact people, the Slack channel, all of that can be listed here. And that creates the tension of people always coming back to the repository. So by doing that, you draw people in. So that's the very first thing. We're making a change to a file, therefore we have to make a commit. Just if you're not familiar with Git at all, come back next week. But for right now, you can think of this as a fancy way of saving. And what we want to do is we want to have a good commit message. So the commit message, a good way to keep one, to write one is, and this is a note about the change. So what was my reasoning for writing this? I don't have to say what I did because it's stored in Git. Instead, I just have to say why I did it. So I'm going to answer the question, with this commit, I give an example of a poor README, because I don't have enough information there. So with this commit, I give an example of a poor README, and I'm going to commit my changes. Great. You'll notice it did some formatting for me here. So I have all the text here. If I want to edit it again, I can hit this again. So this is kind of like your immediate notepad right here to put information, structured information, even better. So the commit, let's go and take a look and see what this looks like up at the top level again. So we have one file in our repository. It's the readme.md, stands for Markdown. Why did I make this most recent effort, this most recent edit? Well, to give an example of a poor README, I did it 26 minutes ago. Who did it? I did it. Here's the information, so you can begin to see how all this fits together. All right. This is really a bad README. I want to fix this README. I don't have time to do it right now, so I'm going to go to Issues. Big green button again, New Issue. Improve README. So I can be very verbose. It's better if I'm verbose. The current README is a bad example to use in a workshop. Find the notes on the great repositories for a checklist. Oh, and actually, Dr. Bell, I'd like for you to do this if I could, so I can actually tag you if you're not in my repository, but if you were, I could tag you. It's actually c.s.bell, I think. So what will happen is if Dr. Bell were in this repository with me, by tagging her, I can make a special mention, and she is then notified. If I want to take a picture of my whiteboard, all right, here's my whiteboard. I want to get all that. I want to get all my notes into here. Great, I take a picture of it, and I literally drag and drop here. This is the repository of all my work, all my thinking, what needs to happen next. I'm going to submit the new issue. Okay, so that is our next point of constructive tension. What is the next thing that you need to do on your project? Well, you know that you've recorded all of your thoughts and all of your needs and wishes here in the issues. So where are you going to go? You're going to go back to the repository. You're going to go back to GitHub. That's, again, driving people there and driving people to contribute to the issues, because that is the safe place to store everything that's going to be happening. And yes, the add button, great point. Thank you, Dr. Bell. All right, now, I'm not quite there yet. These things are still disjointed. I still need to be able to pull everything together into a project. So how do I do that? Well, for one thing, I need to define a project. So let me click on Project. And this is a nice introduction to organize your issues with project boards. Great idea. You can use it to sort tasks, plan your project, automate your workflow. We'll see that in a moment. Track progress, share a status, and wrap up. So we want to create a new project. Big green button, create a project. And again, you may not be able to do this right now, and my apologies, but you'll be able to be upgraded soon after you show your credentials to GitHub. Project board name, I'm going to simply call this GitHub projects. Description is, show a great example of GitHub projects. You'll notice it has project template down here. This is where an additional string of tension is going to come from. Template. What we want to do is to have an automated Kanban. So let me ask folks, those of you who know Git, what is one way to close an issue? when you're programming and when you're making a commit. And again, if you don't have any idea what I just said, don't worry about it. We're going to be covering it next week. But just for the folks who use commits, what is one way to close an issue? And I open it up also to Among and to Shara.
You can use a pull request.
Yeah, but when you're actually programming and when you're making a commit.
So we can also use closing language in our commit messages.
Right.
And this will close the commit by referencing the issue number.
Okay, so automated Kanban. For those of you who knew what that meant, this will have meaning. For those of you who don't know what that meant, don't worry about it. I'm going to gloss over it. But what this means now is we have an automated Kanban. So every time that someone who knows about this trick changes some code and in their commit message says, you know, with this commit message, I close issue number 20. So they saw issue number 20, hey, fix that README page. So they fix the README page, and then in that commit message, they say closes number 20. What happens is that closes the issue, and it ties everything together in a way that you'll see in just one moment. So we want to do short story, choose automated Kanban, create project. And then it gives us some sample files here that we don't really want because they just get in the way. I'm just going to delete these notes. Do know that not everything here has to be an issue, though. You can also create notes. And we'll go over that in just a moment as well. So where's my issue? So I have the issue over here, but it's not on the board. Well, there's one additional step that you have to make when you create an issue, and that is over here. So over here is where you can assign people to the issue, so you know who's supposed to be working on it. You can also assign it to a project board. So now we assign it to the project board, and now we've closed the loop. So now when we go to the GitHub projects, now there's my card. And if I'm a programmer, and let's go ahead and I'm going to show you what this looks like actually. So this is in the to-do. Let's say I'm going to move it over to in progress. I want to do this like now. I want to do this right now. So I'm going to go ahead and go here. I'm going to say lots of good content. So I'm done. And here in the commit, I'm going to say closes number 1. I'm going to commit changes. And then let's go see what projects looks like now. Look, it moved that card over to done. All right, and this seems trivial, right? It's going, oh, okay, so you closed it and then it moved it over automatically, except that if you have this open while you're doing the commit, you watch the card move across. It's gamified. So this is gamification of tracking your tasks and marking what's done and using closes in commit messages. Again, all these tensions going together, so people want to close using commits. People want to have issues associated with it so they can watch their card fly across the screen. It seems ridiculous, doesn't it? And yet, when this was introduced, I saw commits and I saw good commits and commits tied to issues skyrocket because people love seeing the cards move across. And even if they can't see the card moving across, they know that it's happening when they make the commit. So again, this creative tension, this constructive tension between all these, getting people into the repository, into GitHub, and working with this. So let's touch on just a few additional quick things here on how to use this board. If you don't have an issue, or if you don't want to make a full issue out of something, there's wordplay in there, but I won't go there. Yes, I will. If you don't want to make an issue out of it, then what you can do is that you can hit plus here. And plus creates just a card. So I'm going to say with here, create an issue with a picture. And then I can say add. Now that's created a simple card, which is nice. It's fast. You get it in there. You can do this during the sprint planning where you have an idea and you want to put something, you can put it in there right away. But it's not an issue, so you can't assign it to anybody. And you can't automatically close this with a commit. So one thing that you can do here is you can say convert to an issue. So one thing that I've noticed Dr. Bell doing a lot is creating the cards here and then saying convert to issue and then adding in the additional information that you need. But if you're happy with cards, then this looks like a bunch of the other Kanban things that are available online. Why use this one rather than the others? That creative tension, the constructive tension where people are coming and to your repository to contribute work, record what they've done in a way that everyone can see. All right, so we've gone through that. We've gotten a good sense of what that ecosystem looks like and how it works together. So, what makes a great repository? If you have a great repository, it probably means you have a great project and you have a great team. So what makes a great repository? You have an informative README. You have well-written issues. You have interpretable commit messages. And you have a great project board. Well, what do I mean by all these? Well, by informative README, I mean that we have an overview of the project. We have a good statement of the problem. We have a description of the data sources and a description of the data. We might have a discussion of the approach that we're taking, the analytical approach, the data science approach, the research approach. You have the timelines and the deliverable. You want to create that tension there as well. We want this project to be done. We want to submit, by the end of next semester, or the end of this semester, or grant deadline is next month. Too bad, we got to get it done. You want to list the resources that are available for people working on the project. You want to list the stakeholders. Who's the PI? Who's the postdoc? Who are the grad students? Who are the undergrads? And you want to have the contact information for all these people. And why take all this time to have all this information? Again, driving people to the repository, onboarding people without having to sit down and have a 2-hour meeting with them, reminding yourself of where you were 2 years hence when you want to go back to those old issues and actually do the next phase of the project. Having this all recorded there makes all the difference in the world. And finally, a license. And finally, if you want people to be able to contribute, if you have an open source or you're open to collaborators, information on how you can contribute. What do I mean by well-written issues? Well, here it's got to be a good description. And the question to ask yourself is, if I were reading this just out of the blue, I just came here and read this, do I have enough information to work this problem? And you want to include context. This might even just be a picture of the whiteboard. So you have the big picture of the whiteboard that I just showed you. You might even circle part and saying, the part we're talking about is right here. We're not trying to solve this whole problem. We're going to solve this problem right here that I'm outlining. It's assigned to someone. Work doesn't get done if it isn't assigned. It's the tragedy of the commons. It's associated with a project, so it will show up on the project board. And finally, closed with a commit. So that is the final, or an issue. When it's closed with a commit, and now that means that the work that you did is closely associated with the issue. So if you want to go back and figure out how you solve this problem, you can immediately see the code or the work that was done to solve that problem. And what do I mean by interpretable commit message? You simply answer the question, with this commit, I clean to remove errors, updated with new Mac-friendly, and I can't read the rest. Just finish that phrase. And what is a great project board? Well, a great project board is one that is well tended. That means you stick with your sprints, whether they're weekly or bi-weekly, and they're reviewed. You have a well thought out backlog. So these issues here are not just listed willy-nilly. They're in order of importance. They're updated. So it's updated automatically. You know, when people close issues, it's updated automatically. One thing that kind of drives me crazy, and this happens though for various reasons, is a bunch of stuff is still sitting in this sprint, and nobody ever moved it over to review. You know, I'm sorry, nobody ever moved it to in progress. And you're like, you open up the board, and Dr. Bell, I know that you experienced this too. It's like, oh my God, this is not going to be a good meeting. This is not going to be a good end of sprint meeting because nothing got done. And then people are like, oh yeah, no, I worked on that. Actually, I'm done. And you're like, that's where the automated Kanban board comes in, because people love the idea when they make the commit that it's flying across, even if it's in their mind's eye. And it's reviewed at the end of the sprint. At the end of the sprint, you take a look. You might reorder your backlog. You might, but it's well tended and is reviewed. Great project board has contributors being held accountable. So in that conversation, at the end of the sprint, you look to see where the cards are. And if a whole bunch of cards, and this happens to me all the time, because I still try to be an individual contributor, but is probably not a good idea for me to be an individual contributor because I'm often the one with the stuff still in progress. You know, and then I'm sure you love this conversation, Dr. Bell. So Jesse, do you think that you'll be able to get this done next sprint? And I say, yes, I think I can. You hold people accountable. And the stakeholders are viewing regularly. If you are the PI, you definitely need to be looking at this. If you are the executive that has overall responsibility for this project along with other things, you still ought to be looking at it. This tells you at a glance where things are and how things are going. All right, so we figured out what doesn't work right now. We looked at traditional approaches a little bit, and we talked a little bit about that. We talked about the data science approach. Now it's time for us to take score, and I'm going to need you to vote on this. So here are the issues that we had before. So give me a thumbs up if you think that this approach, using GitHub for your project management, the whole ecosystem, does this give you the right tools to manage projects? Give me a thumbs up if you think so. Remember, you can get to that under reactions. All right, I'm going to give this one to us. Yes. All right. Can this help? Oh, and Umang, can you clear out all the responses? You can do that in the participants window. All right, scope creep. Does this keep you from trying to take on too much? We didn't talk about that too much, but remember, you were able to look and see how much people were doing by clicking on their icon. Okay. Yeah, so you can plan out what's happening and lay it out. That's part of having a great project board, which is a well-tended backlog. I'm going to give us that one. Does this help you organize your project work? Thumbs up if you think this can help you organize your project work. Yep. All right. Does this help with assigning and keeping up with task and state completion? Oh, yeah. Does this give you a way to prioritize? I'm going to give this. Yes, you can prioritize your tasks. Hard to estimate task effort. Personally, here I'm thinking solves part of the problem where you at least are saying what a task is, and you might break it up into parts. In and of itself, I'm going to say maybe. I'm a little bit ambivalent on that one. Does this give you a way to have centralized and cohesive communication? Yep. All right. Does this solve the iterative nature of data science workflow? Well, you can at least know how bad it is. And by having the final deadlines, you can at least keep in mind in one place when you have to get things done. Okay, how about high overhead for project management tools, especially the people who had worked with other tools? Is this less overhead than other tools than you have used? Thumbs up if it is, if you think this is manageable overhead. All right. And we kind of did this one, communication between stakeholders. I'm going to give this one. Not bad for a free tool. Not bad. So there are definitely things we didn't have time to cover today. One of the things that's useful that you might want to go and look at as you build your own and take a look is labels. Labels are a really nice way of indicating when things are bugs or when they're enhancements, or you can make your own labels as well to put directly on those issues. But you have everything you need right now to get started. If you are interested, I'll send out an email to everybody who attended today to let you know about a special time for us to get together where I can walk you through getting the academic credentials into GitHub so you can go ahead and get that free GitHub organization. But I'd like to open this up for questions now. And I'm very happy to stay after the hour if you have questions beyond 1 o'clock. What questions do you have?
This is Ed again. So really what you're describing really doesn't have, I think, it's not only relevant, obviously, to data science. I mean, this is really, running projects in the lab or whatever we do. This is really, at this point, project management. Would you
Yes.
agree?
I would. Project management sort of augmented with the actual work. Because project management, as traditionally defined, you have to, it's like double entry in books. You have to say what you're going to be doing, and then you have to give it to the project manager to write down. And here it's all tied together. And it's not just code. It could be, work on projects. It could be work on documents. All of that can be tracked in the same way. And if you tie it together like this, then people tend to stay involved. They don't go wandering off.
Yeah, and then another question is, I mean, it still seems to me that having face-to-face is still important, right?
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
so you would, I guess, integrate this. Maybe these are the sprint meetings where you might do it on Zoom if we're working remotely.
Yes. And even if it's not remote, then you have it pulled up and you're displaying. Absolutely. It's in place of the physical Kanban board, and it's in place of everyone's individual to-do lists. So it's all centralized. In-person is really important. What I've noticed with this is it keeps the meeting shorter, well-focused, because if it's not on the Kanban board, you're not going to discuss it. Or if you want to discuss it, it's not on the Kanban board, it needs to go on the Kanban board. It needs to be memorialized. So it keeps people very focused. Great. Other questions?
Is there any chance that you're planning to do kind of an overview on how to integrate, pulling data from RedCap into GitHub for, doing those kind of projects? Because that's one area that we would really like to begin to integrate into the work that we do. So.
Yeah, Robin, and I know that yeah, absolutely. Let's, Umang, if you could capture that, and this might be, so we have weekly demos and we have something we call cool things. This might be a really good cool things topic where it's just like, here's how you safely, do your credentials and grab data from RedCap. It's a great idea, Robin. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Other questions?
I want to say thank you first. The link between issues and project has been kind of unclear to me up until now. So that was the missing part for me. And we're just starting to use GitHub, and it has been very informative. So, and I just want to ask, I missed one part, when you assign an issue to a project board, can you just show one more time to do it?
Absolutely. Yeah, because it's a little bit mysterious if, let's see, okay, here we go. So let's go back to, if I go back here and come on, please go back. There we go. So now if I add an issue, and so I'm going to add an issue right here. I'm going to say, include RedCap directions. Okay, I assign it to myself. I might give it a label of, documentation. And then down here where it says projects, this is where I have to say I want it associated with that project. And then when I do that, then when I go to projects, it will appear in the should have appeared. Pay no attention to the man behind the counter. It will appear here in the to-do. I may not have given it a chance to submit. And also, if you close it with a commit, then it will move it over to done.
Okay.
The other thing I didn't mention here is that you can add a column. So if you wanted to have a review column or something like that, it's highly customized, can be highly customized. Great. Other questions?
I think we have one in the chat about using code from other people's repositories. They ask, can I bring in or link code from other repositories as the license allows?
Yes, and there are a number of different ways of doing that. If you want the entire repository, you could fork the repository, especially if you plan on making additions and then like suggesting back to the contributor that they might want to include yours. If you are using, subroutines or modules, you'll want to carefully read their license, make sure that you can use it. And often it's just cutting and pasting, but then you make reference to it, in the documentation of the code that it's from this location. You give a link to where it came from. Live linking is a little bit I haven't seen that a whole lot. The closest that I've seen is when people give gists, and those are small little code snippets that are meant to be sort of shared just as the code snippets. But repositories, it's not common to try to deep link, if you will, into the code. So it's usually copying and pasting, noting that you've done it and what license was involved. Great question. Other questions? All right, I'd like to
question, Jesse.
Yeah.
You spoke about I think deep learning and machine learning in May. When will that be announced?
That actually, we can let you all know about it right now, and then it will be announced. We're putting together the application because we're sort of aiming for certain strata. So the people who are trying to get into deep learning and are very theoretical, it's not necessarily for them, but it's for people who want to be able to do the hands-on. So we have this sort of nice in between. I can give you the dates. Dr. Bell, remember the dates? 17th through the 21st. Let me pull up my calendar. Give me a quick moment, and I will tell you what the dates are. And you can feel free to email me, so we will definitely notify you when we do open up registration for that. But the dates are okay, great. So 17th through the 21st. We don't know if we're going to take the entire week, but 17th through the 24th. 21st is going to be Introduction to Python for Data Science. So if you have only a little bit of Python, or you have Python, but you've only ever done like software engineering with it, then this short course would be for you. If you don't know any Python, then we'll be suggesting that you do some pre-work before this. Then the following week, which is going to be the week of the 24th through the 28th, we're going to be getting into Python for deep learning. And this is going to be Python specifically to use pre-trained networks or to use frameworks that are available. Hugging Face has over 1,000 pre-trained models at this point that you can use for question answering, summarization, multiple languages, but you have to know enough Python to be able to actually run those. Same thing with image segmentation, other types of tasks, fast.ai and Python image library. We're going to be teaching sort of enough Python and template code so you can solve problems using these, but then you'll want to go on and dive deeper on your own if you want to do modifications of the network or anything special like that. But man, you can do a ton right now with just pre-trained networks, and but you just need to know a little bit more Python than most people know.
And you'll make your email address available to us?
Oh, yes, actually, let me put it into yes.
I had one more question, if I could. I was curious about, you know, if you would recommend for anything that you kind of want to say. So, like, you know, if you're going to be working on a project for like an extended period of time, you know, like 1 year, 2 years, like who knows, and you want whatever you are kind of some of the information and description, you know, for people who are going to be coming onto the project over that time period, that you want to really stay evergreen, kind of easy for them to get to. Do you try to, you know, I suppose you would keep all that information in the README for that repository? Because it's seems like if some of that stuff was like in the issues or something, it would kind of get, it could kind of get lost potentially if like the important description that you want people to, you know, come to and be able to review and kind of always have in their head about this project. So I don't know if that's the right way to kind of view how they use the README, but yeah, if you have any comments about that.
Yeah, and the README is sort of our first place that we go to. But one thing that we've been looking at also is the wikis, the GitHub wikis, which might be another way to do that too. So if you especially have more complex, if that README starts getting really, really long, then you're right, it tends not to be updated as much. So short, sweet, to the point. And if you have something where you have like information that's relevant to one part of the project, and you want many people to be able to contribute to it, then the wiki may be the way to go.
Okay.
For that, yeah.
That's great. Thanks.
But you know, part of the we were just talking about this, as a matter of fact, making more of our repositories public when we're actually actively working on a project. Again, this is another sort of, you know, constructive tension, because our you know, the sort of concern was, well, what if the README is, you know, not, you know, ready for public consumption? It's like, well, if we make it public, then we're going to want to keep it ready for public consumption, which keeps it evergreen, as you were saying, Robin. So that's what I always have in my mind is not just sort of how to run the project, but sort of how to run projects. So, you know, you always are sort of self-supporting, just like that table. So it always maintains the tension. Other questions? All right, then I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us today. Hope that you can join us next week when we talk about hands-on Git. Have a good day.